Hi everyone. Five Nights at Freddy's is a very popular horror game for everyone. You're a security guard or a child, depending on which one you play, trapped in a children's arcade pizzeria where animatronics come to life in an attempt to kill you because you're not one of them. Animatronics coming to life is a great aspect for a horror game. However, there was some real life events that happened in which the game got the idea from. But before we get into it, I want to remind you guys that if you like my content, please hit that like button. And if you want more of these types of stories, the latest horror news, and indie horror gameplays, also subscribe. But with that being said, let's delve into the gloomy and gruesome world that helped inspire the game series we all know and love. The story starts with a boy named Nathan Gerard Dunlap. Nathan was born April 8th, 1974. He lived with his biological mother and an adoptive father who married his mother a couple months after he was born. Now, the family moved around a lot and he resided in a few different states, but they wound up settling in Colorado in 1984. Nathan's mother suffered from mental illness. She had schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Now, while Dunlap was growing up, it was recorded that in junior high school, he attempted suicide at least 2 times, which then prompted his father to take him to a psychiatrist at the age of 14, where he was tested, and it was revealed that he suffered from what's called hypomania. Now, hypomania is a sign of bipolar disorder, but it could also be indicative of other mental disorder. But after this visit and this diagnosis, nothing really came of it. He never really went back, he was never pushed to go back, and just continued to grow up as somewhat normal as he could. Now, at the age of 15, Nathan started to get in trouble. He committed a few armed robberies, first with a golf club, and eventually went to a firearm, and he was arrested shortly after. From this point until the age of 18, Dunlap lived in the juvenile detention system. And while he was there, he had a few outbursts. They don't really go into much description of what these outbursts were, but it was enough to send him to a children's psychiatric hospital, where he served the rest of his time. He was released at 18 and proceeded to start selling drugs for money. In this time frame, he was arrested about 5 times, all with misdemeanor charges. And in May of 1993, 19-year-old Nathan got hired at Chuck E. Cheese. He was hired as a cook and worked there for a few months until July. He had an argument with his supervisor about working extra hours past his shift. This event resulted in him being promptly fired and left him very angry. Nathan stewed about this for months. He felt he was disrespected, he was made to feel like a fool, and throughout that summer, it was noted by friends of his that he stated he was going to get even. As he even said he was going to get even, there was even statements of him saying that he was going to rob the place and kill everyone. Now, he would make these comments off and on throughout the summer, and most people just figured he was angry and mad until December 14th of 1993. On that day, Nathan was playing basketball with some friends, and it was at that moment he stated he knew that he made his mind up and that he was going to go to the Chuck E. Cheese and finally get his revenge. Once Dunlap made up his mind that he was finally going to get his revenge, he went home, grabbed his small caliber handgun, and went to the Chuck E. Cheese just prior to 9 p.m. that evening. Now, Nathan would sit there, order a ham and cheese sandwich, sat at the table by himself and enjoyed his meal. He made some conversation with the worker that was there and found out that the supervisor that had fired him wasn't even there that night. After he finished his sandwich, he got up, called his girlfriend, played a few arcade games, And then around 9:50 that evening, he went to the men's bathroom and waited. As Dunlap waited, 50-year-old Margaret Colbert watched the clock. Margaret went and headed back to her office in order to count the day's receipts. Now, Sylvia Crowell started cleaning the salad bar. The 19-year-old balancing a full-time work schedule and college classes. Nearby, high school junior Ben Grant turned on the vacuum. Colleen O'Connor was also helping that night, but she was distracted. She had just found out that her parents had just purchased her a new car. In the kitchen, Bobby Stevens scrubbed away. He hadn't been scheduled to work that day, but he needed the cash. He was 20 and he had a 7-month-old baby at home. At about 10:05, as the employees were cleaning up and doing their regular routine that they have done so often before, Nathan exited the bathroom. The salad bar was the closest to the bathroom door, and Sylvia didn't notice as Nathan walked up behind her, raised his gun, and shot her right behind the ear. As she fell, he looked away. He couldn't stomach the sight of gore and blood. That's when he quickly moved to where Ben was vacuuming. He shoots Ben in the left eye. The bullet entered and lodged in Ben's brain, killing him instantly. Colleen, on the other hand, saw Dunlap kill both of her coworkers. He was a boy with a gun, and she fell to her knees at that moment. Kneeling in front of him, she begged for her life. "Please don't shoot. I won't tell." "I have to," Nathan said, as he raised the gun up and shot her in the top of the head. Inside the kitchen, Bobby heard 3 loud pops, but he didn't stop working. See, he was used to the sound of popping balloons and figured it was just his coworkers popping the balloons in order to clean up. Bobby didn't have much time to react. Nathan immediately barged into the kitchen, raised the gun. Bobby didn't know what to do and started to say hello, but before he can get the word out, Nathan shot him in the face. A bullet entered Bobby's jaw, and it sent him falling to the floor, and Nathan exited the kitchen. As Nathan exited the kitchen, he walked to the manager's office where Margaret was counting the receipt. He raised the gun to Margaret and told her to open the safe, which she obliged. The last words she heard were, "Thank you," and then he shot her. He shot Margaret in the ear, and as he was taking the money and the tokens and everything that he could, Margaret moved again, and Nathan saw this. He raised the gun, shot Margaret one more time to make sure she was dead, and proceeded to leave the place. Bobby was laying in the kitchen. He was actually shot in the jaw, and he was still alive. Bobby would say that it initially felt like a cigarette burn. It quickly felt like he was hit in the face with a baseball bat. He laid there and played dead while the rest of the events unfolded. After Nathan left, Bobby got up, made his way to a nearby apartment complex, and started banging on all the doors until someone answered and was able to call 911. Authorities arrived on scene and found all 5 coworkers had been shot. 3 were dead on scene, with Bobby and Sylvia was found still alive. Both were taken to the hospital. Bobby was labeled in stable condition and survived his wound, and Sylvia was shortly declared brain dead after arriving at the hospital and died the next day from her injury. Meanwhile, Nathan decided to go straight to his girlfriend's place after he had just shot and he thought killed 5 people. The couple started to have sex, and shortly after, he received a page from his mother stating that the authorities were looking for him. See, it didn't take very long for the authorities to figure out who had done this. So Nathan cleaned himself up, tried to scrub his hands, and went to his mother's house, where he waited for the authorities to arrive. If you thought that was bad enough, the real show starts. Because as if shooting and killing 5 people wasn't enough, the justice system is there to make sure that the circus goes on. Now, this case carried on for the next 20 years. Shortly after Nathan was arrested, we have to understand what was going on at the time. Around that time, violence was springing up all over the United States, and the government vowed to start a justice reform system that was tougher on crime. Both political parties were in favor of stronger and harsher punishments, and also pushed for even more death penalty sentences. With this sort of climate, it was pretty cut and dry that Dunlap had committed these murders, planned these murders, and would have been sentenced to death. But in Colorado, things were also a little different. At the time, Colorado had not executed anyone in 25 years. And out of the 77 capital murder cases that had happened in that time frame, only 7 men were sentenced to death. Since this case garnered so much attention, the story was so gruesome, and the victims were so young, the public was outraged for years after the event. And because of this, the case was determined to be compromised in that they were not going to be able to find a jury to give a fair trial. They moved the case to Colorado Springs, which was about 60 miles away. Now, due to Dunlap's financial situation, the court gave him his counsel. Both attorneys realized that their job was to secure the most lenient sentence as possible. And when the case started, the evidence was overwhelming. Bobby survived and was able to give an eyewitness testimony. And with so much evidence, Dunlap's history, and an eyewitness, there was not much the defense could do. And the defense didn't really do much. They didn't call any witnesses, they didn't object much. But the real cherry on the cake was when the victims' families got to address the court. And as the family spoke, something in Dunlap snapped. Nathan went on a 3.5-minute rant, screaming and sobbing uncontrollably, saying, "Kill me right now. I've had enough of this stuff." He didn't say stuff, but just throw me in the chair and do whatever you want. After that, Dunlap was sentenced to 2 death sentences for every life he had taken. In October of 1997, Colorado was to execute the first man they have executed in the last 30 years. And as that was going on, correctional officers would taunt Nathan. They would say his day was coming and to be ready for it. And between him being in the cell and his life almost at an end, he snapped. Nathan was found having a hysterical episode and rubbing feces on his mouth. This prompted them to send Nathan to a psychiatric hospital for further evaluation. As he was at the psychiatric hospital, Nathan was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, just like his mother. And afterwards, doctors would start looking into Nathan's past and realized that Nathan had been suffering with bipolar disease for a long time, and that he was a victim of child abuse and had lots of mental issues as a child. Now, with all the information that the defense had found, including the suicide attempts and the previous psychiatric hospital stay when he was in the juvenile system, the defense didn't even attempt to bring up his competency in order to stand trial. Not that it would have gave him an innocent verdict, but it may have changed where he had wound up and may have even prevented receiving a death sentence. A psychiatrist was even willing to testify during the initial case in 1996, but the defense didn't even bother to call the psychiatrist. Because of this lack of attempt on the part of the defense, new defense attorneys came to Nathan for appeals, and Nathan would appeal his death sentences over and over and over. Each one of them denied. The state would have spent over $2 million in order to take his life. And finally, in 2013, Judge Sylvester would announce that Dunlap would finally have an execution date of May 22nd, 2013. However, prior to his execution, politics would enter the judicial system once again. There was a huge push at the time from civil rights groups such as the NAACP to save Dunlap's life and to be against the death penalty. On top of that, the then Governor Hickenlooper, was against the death penalty. And with so much attention in the political world, Hickenlooper would grant Dunlap temporary reprieve to prevent him from being executed. But there were some stipulations to giving that temporary reprieve. See, that would only stay in place as long as Hickenlooper would be reelected. And the reason he didn't receive full clemency was because Nathan would have been put back in general population, which would not have been good for Nathan at all, especially with his mental illness history. And this would be continued on until 2018. In 2018, Colorado elected a new governor, Governor Jared Polis, who was strongly against the death penalty and also repealed the death penalty for Colorado in 2020. This repeal saved Dunlap's life, but it would leave him in jail with multiple life sentences without the chance of parole. So to this day, Nathan is still alive and in prison and will stay there until the day he died. But the survivor of this scene has had to deal with this for over 20 years because he would constantly be pulled into the courtroom every time an appeal happened and every time a group wanted to save his life. Now, Nathan committed an atrocious and gruesome crime, and this would be the ground basis for Five Nights at Freddy's. I hope you enjoyed the video. Very sad, very weird, crazy tale. It's just mind-boggling to me how just I don't know, like how politics can enter into this system and play seesaw with someone's life. It's pretty apparent that he did these crimes and he was going to pretty much die in jail one way or the other. But to yo-yo with his life and to yo-yo with the victim's life is mind-boggling to me. Whatever side of the fence you're on, whether you support the death penalty or not, to have a man wonder if he's going to be executed or not executed for over 20 years is just crazy to me. And to drag a survivor who was there when 4 of the people that he knew were dead and he should have died, to bring him back and forth into this judicial system when he just wants to live the rest of his life and already is dealing with probably mental issues from the event, is just mind-boggling, all for someone's political agenda. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed it. It was just a wild ride. So make sure that you have a great day and be safe out there.